Long before George Washington became the first president of the United States, he was just a young man trying to prove himself. At only 21 years old, he was sent on a dangerous mission during the French and Indian War. The British governor of Virginia chose Washington to deliver a message deep into the Ohio Valley. His task? Tell the French to leave the land that Britain claimed. Imagine the risk: a young officer, traveling through freezing forests, hostile territory, with no guarantee of survival. But Washington accepted without hesitation. This journey tested his courage. He faced icy rivers, harsh winter storms, and even attacks from native warriors. At one point, his raft broke apart in a freezing river, and he barely made it to shore alive. Still, he pressed on and completed his mission. But his challenges didn't stop there. Soon after, Washington was sent back to fight. He built a small fort called Fort Necessity, but the French and their native allies attacked. The battle was fierce, and Washington's men were outnumbered. In the end, he had to surrender, one of the only times in his life he ever did. Yet, instead of destroying his confidence, this failure taught Washington something important. True leadership comes from endurance, learning from mistakes, and never giving up. These early experiences shaped the man who would one day lead an entire revolution. They showed his bravery, his resilience, and his determination, qualities that made him the leader America needed. When the American colonies finally rose against British rule, they needed a leader, a figure strong enough to unite 13 divided colonies. In 1775, the Continental Congress chose George Washington as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. Washington didn't ask for this power. In fact, he accepted it humbly, saying he didn't feel fully prepared. But what made him different was his character. He believed in sacrifice, in duty, and in the cause of freedom. The American army he inherited was not professional. Soldiers were farmers, blacksmiths, and ordinary workers. They had little training, poor weapons, and almost no money. Facing them was the British Army, one of the most powerful forces in the world. Washington's role was not just to fight, but to inspire. He had to hold the army together through fear, hunger, and defeat. His calm presence on the battlefield gave his men hope. When battles were lost, Washington did not collapse. He retreated wisely, saved his army, and lived to fight another day. The most famous moment came on Christmas night, 1776. The army was weak, morale was low, and many thought the revolution was finished. But Washington made a daring decision. In the freezing cold, he led his men across the icy Delaware River and launched a surprise attack at Trenton. The victory shocked the world. It proved that the Americans could fight back and win. Through courage, patience, and determination, Washington's leadership turned a struggling rebellion into a true revolution. He wasn't just a general. He was the heart of the American fight for independence. In the winter of 1777, George Washington and his army marched into a place called Valley Forge. It wasn't a battlefield, it was a camp. But for the soldiers, it felt like the hardest battle of the entire revolution. The winter was brutal. Freezing winds cut through thin clothing. Many soldiers had no shoes. Their bare feet left bloody tracks in the snow. Food was so scarce that men boiled leather just to fill their stomachs. Disease spread quickly, and hundreds died. Morale was at its lowest. Some soldiers deserted, and others thought of giving up. The dream of independence seemed close to dying. But this is where Washington's true leadership shined. Instead of leaving his men, he stayed with them, sharing their suffering, walking among their huts, listening to their pain. He gave them not just orders, but encouragement. He reminded them why they were fighting, not for money, but for freedom, for their families, and for the future of a new nation. At the same time, Washington made bold decisions. He welcomed Baron von Steuben, a Prussian officer, to train the troops. Day by day, these ragged farmers became disciplined soldiers. Slowly, the camp of despair transformed into an army of determination. By the time spring came, Washington's army was not broken, it was reborn. Valley Forge became the turning point where Washington proved that leadership was not only about winning battles, but about holding people together in the darkest times. His courage in those cold months gave America something stronger than weapons: hope. George Washington was not just brave, he was smart. He knew that the Continental Army could never match the British in numbers, weapons, or resources. The British had the best trained soldiers and the strongest navy in the world. If Washington tried to fight them head-on, the revolution would end in disaster. So, Washington chose a different path, a war of strategy, not strength. He mastered the art of survival. Instead of risking his entire army in one huge battle, he used quick movements, surprise attacks, and clever retreats. His goal was simple: keep the American army alive long enough to wear the British down. One brilliant example was the Battle of Trenton. On Christmas night, 1776, when the enemy least expected it, Washington led his men across the icy Delaware River. They attacked at dawn, surprising the Hessian soldiers and winning a vital victory. This bold move lifted American spirits at the darkest moment. Another part of his strategy was deception. Washington often spread false information to confuse the British. Once, he lit campfires at night to make his army look bigger than it was, while secretly moving his troops elsewhere. By the time the British realized the truth, it was too late. Washington also knew the value of alliances. He welcomed help from France and coordinated with their navy and troops, turning the tide of war. His tactics were not about glory, they were about endurance, patience, and outsmarting the enemy. Washington proved that sometimes the greatest victories come not from brute force, but from wisdom, timing, and courage. George Washington's leadership was not defined only by victories, it was tested most in defeat. During the early years of the American Revolution, Washington lost several major battles. In New York, the British forced him to retreat again and again. His army was small, poorly supplied, and often on the edge of collapse. Many leaders would have given up. But Washington did not. Instead, he turned every setback into a lesson. When his troops were beaten, he didn't waste lives by fighting hopeless battles. He withdrew carefully, saving his army for another day. "We may be beaten," he seemed to say, "but we will never be destroyed." His resilience inspired his men. They saw that their commander did not break under pressure. Even when Congress doubted him, even when people criticized him, Washington remained calm and steady. One of the most powerful examples came after a defeat in 1776. His soldiers were cold, tired, and ready to go home. But Washington refused to let despair win. Only days later, he made the daring move across the Delaware River and struck at Trenton, turning despair into hope. Washington showed that true leadership is not about always winning, it is about standing firm when everything seems lost. His resilience kept the revolution alive. Without it, America might never have survived. In the face of defeat, Washington proved something greater than military skill. He proved the strength of his spirit. By 1781, the American Revolution had dragged on for 6 long years. Washington's army was tired, supplies were low, and many wondered if independence could ever be won. But Washington was patient. He knew the right moment would come. That moment arrived at Yorktown, Virginia. The British general, Lord Cornwallis, had set up camp there, confident that the mighty British Navy would protect him. Washington saw an opportunity, and he was ready. Working closely with the French, Washington created a bold plan. The French Navy blocked the sea, cutting off Cornwallis's escape. Meanwhile, Washington and his French allies marched south with thousands of troops, surrounding Yorktown on land. For weeks, they bombarded the British defenses. Cannons roared day and night. The British tried to hold on, but there was no way out. Washington's determination and careful planning left Cornwallis trapped. Finally, on October 19, 1781, Cornwallis surrendered his entire army. The news spread like wildfire. After years of struggle, the impossible had happened. America had won. Washington did not celebrate with arrogance. He accepted the victory with dignity, knowing it belonged not just to him, but to every soldier who had suffered and fought. Yorktown was not just a military triumph, it was the moment when the dream of independence became a reality. This victory, built on Washington's patience, strategy, and leadership, ended the war and changed the course of history. After the Revolution, George Washington stood as the most powerful man in America. He could have become a king. He could have ruled for life. Many even expected him to take absolute power. But Washington had a different vision. He believed true leadership was not about holding power, it was about serving the people. When the war ended, he shocked the world by resigning as commander of the army. Kings and rulers in Europe could not believe it. Here was a man who had the power to control a nation, yet he chose to step away. This act showed Washington's greatest strength, his integrity. He valued freedom and democracy above personal ambition. Later, when he was elected as the first president, he led with the same honesty and humility. He refused to live like a monarch. He rejected fancy titles and preferred simply, "Mr. President." He listened to advisors, respected the Constitution, and always put the nation before himself. Most importantly, he set an example by stepping down after 2 terms. At a time when leaders everywhere clung to power, Washington walked away, proving that America would not be ruled by one man, but by the will of its people. His vision shaped the foundation of the United States, a government built on liberty, accountability, and trust. Washington showed that real greatness is not measured by how long you hold power, but by how wisely you use it. In 1789, George Washington became the first president of the United States. The country was brand new, no guidebooks, no traditions, no tested government. Everything had to be built from scratch. And once again, Washington's leadership was tested. People trusted him because of his honesty and sacrifice. He had no desire for power, yet he accepted the presidency out of duty. His task was enormous: to unite 13 former colonies into one nation. Washington set important precedents. He formed a cabinet of advisors, showing that a president should not rule alone but should listen to wise counsel. He worked with Congress, proving that the new government would be balanced, not a monarchy, not chaos, but something in between. He focused on stability. The country was in debt from the war, and people feared the government might fail. Washington supported strong financial policies, encouraged trade, and pushed for peace. His calm leadership gave Americans confidence in their new democracy. But Washington also understood the danger of division. He warned against political parties and urged Americans to stay united as one people. He also knew that foreign wars could destroy the young nation, so he guided America with caution and neutrality. By the time he left office after 2 terms, the United States was no longer just an experiment. It was a functioning nation, respected at home and abroad. Washington had taken the fragile dream of independence and turned it into a living reality. Through patience, wisdom, and vision, he became not just the first president, but the builder of a nation. When George Washington became president, the young United States was weak and fragile. Across the ocean, Europe was at war, especially Britain and France. Many Americans wanted to join one side or the other. Some supported France, remembering their help during the Revolution. Others leaned toward Britain, the powerful trading partner. But Washington saw the danger clearly. If America entered these foreign wars, the new nation could be crushed before it had the chance to grow. So, in 1793, Washington made a bold decision: the United States would stay neutral. He issued the Proclamation of Neutrality, declaring that America would not take sides in Europe's conflicts. This was not easy. Both Britain and France pressured him. American newspapers attacked him. People accused him of being weak. Yet Washington stood firm. He knew that America's survival depended on peace, not endless wars. His goal was to give the nation time to strengthen its economy, build its institutions, and unite its people. Later, in his farewell address, Washington gave one of his most famous warnings: avoid permanent alliances with foreign powers. He wanted America to remain independent in its decisions, free from the traps of European politics. This policy of neutrality shaped U.S. foreign relations for decades. It showed Washington's wisdom, that true leadership sometimes means resisting pressure and choosing patience over passion. By keeping America out of foreign wars, Washington protected the fragile republic and gave it the chance to stand on its own feet. When George Washington finally retired in 1797, he left behind more than a military victory or a presidency. He left behind a legacy that defined a nation. He had led America through war, guided it through its fragile first years, and then, most importantly, stepped away from power by choice. This act alone set him apart from most leaders in history. Kings and emperors clung to their thrones, but Washington showed that true greatness lies in service, not in control. The people called him the father of the nation, not because he ruled them, but because he protected them, guided them, and put their future above his own desires. His honesty, humility, and strength became the moral compass for generations of leaders to follow. Even after his death in 1799, Washington's example lived on. Every president after him looked back to his choices, his respect for democracy, his warning against division, his belief in unity. The United States itself was shaped by his vision. Around the world, people saw something new, a leader who could win power, hold it with dignity, and then give it up peacefully. Washington proved that a republic could survive, that freedom could last, and that leadership could be rooted in principle. His legacy is not just in monuments or history books, it is in the very idea of America. That is why, more than 2 centuries later, he is still remembered as the father of the nation.